Hello.
Hi, pleased to meet you.
How are you?
I'm fine. Happy to be in Zagreb for the first time ever.
First time ever. So how do you like it here?
It's hot. Very picturesque, very nice. Everybody's very nice to me.
And Eurocon, the past 2 days have passed, so how do you like it for now?
It's the busiest Eurocon I've ever been to.
Why, they push you to do things you don't want to?
Just very, very large, very, very enthusiastic fans. There are a lot of people here. Some Eurocons you go to, they're quite small and a lot of mostly old men sitting around drinking beer, lamenting that fandom isn't what it used to be. But this one is young and energetic.
Do you like that way, or it's better for you to sit around, drink beer and talk?
You got me. I'm one of the old men who sit around drinking beer.
Okay. I want to ask you about your fantasy series, The Merchant Princess. How was it for you to write a female character?
Okay, first part is not a fantasy series. It's a science fiction series that had to be sold as fantasy for a couple of years for contractual reasons. Okay. Writing a female character, it's something a lot of men seem to have difficulty with. It shouldn't be hard. You're surrounded by women. Talk to them. Observe them. Work out that for the most part they're not that different. They are actually human beings. You'd think more men would be aware of this.
So do you have any more plans for writing some real fantasy series or novel?
Well, I've got a problem with fantasy. I come from a country that actually has a queen and people who sit in a chamber called the House of Lords that's part of our legislature, and I'm allergic to it. I'm actually a Republican. Not an American Republican, I'm just in favor of a republic. A lot of fantasy is very retrogressive politically. It tends to hark back to a sort of fairy tale world of kings and princesses and evil monsters to be defeated and the one true heir to the throne, and everybody knows their place. And when you actually look behind the curtain, it's not that nice. Historically, that sort of period, that sort of culture was not a great one to live in for most people. I've occasionally speculated about wanting to write a fantasy trilogy. Unfortunately, the young lad growing up as the only child of the poor but honest folks who adopted him and who turns out to have a destiny would be the Dark Lord.
So, why is science fiction better for you? Why do you think, I mean, it's still a fiction, but in another way. Why is better?
Science fiction is, like all fiction, the study of the human condition, of what makes us human, of how we respond to interesting events. It is creative lies, actually. I tell lies for money. Science fiction is more focused on plausible events that have not yet happened, on the could-bes and the possible. And I'm going to pause here for a little bit. On the one hand, it offers a discipline. You need to reach for plausibility. On the other hand, it offers a somewhat more freedom than the traditional literary mainstream novel, which for the past 80, 90 years in the English language has focused on hyperrealism to such an extent that it's detrimental to the exercise of the imagination. It attempts to understand the minds of the people who write it and nothing else.
But how is like for you to live in a world where old science fiction is becoming a true? Because old science fiction movies thought that we now in 2012 will have something, and we actually do have those things. What do you think about that?
Well, we're living in the 21st century, and you can't open a newspaper today and read it without stumbling across something that would have been science fiction 50 years ago. And this is great. But it also means that the mainstream literary novels, as Lev Grossman, the reviews editor of Time magazine, pointed out, can't write a realistic mainstream novel that doesn't have iPhones and drones bombing people in Afghanistan and the internet. If you try to write fiction that ignores this stuff, you're ignoring the real world. So I actually find this really interesting. The novels of mine that I'm most interested in currently are the near future ones, Halting State and Rule 34, which are set in the very near future, 10 to 15 years out, in a world that has evolved from where we are today. If you look at the near future, 90% of the near future is utterly familiar because it's around us already. 10%, well, you know, new styles of cars, better computers. Yes, it's not here yet, but we can predict it. And then there's the 1% that's utterly unimaginable. When trying to explain this, as a reference point, I like to use William Gibson's novel, Pattern Recognition. Published in 2002, the year after 9/11. Pattern Recognition was set in 2002. It was arguably a mainstream novel, yet if you could put it in a time machine and send it back to the young William Gibson in 1982 to hand in to his editor would have been overjoyed to receive this miracle of cyberpunk 21st century fiction. Except there's just one thing wrong with it. It's set in a world where the Soviet Union doesn't exist anymore and the Russians have gone capitalist. What's wrong with you? That's unimaginable.
But it's easier for you to write, I don't know, 5 years in advance or 50?
That's the wrong question. Writing 5 years in advance is relatively easy. Writing 500 years in advance is relatively easy. The hard bit is 50.
Why is that? Why?
500 years in the future. Well, let's look 500 years in the past. Where was Croatia 500 years ago? Where was Europe 500 years ago? It might as well be an alien world to us. You can set anything you like 500 years in the future, near enough, and you're not going to be around for people to point and laugh at you. Again, 5 years in the future. Okay, if I was writing a story set in 2012, back in 2007, well, actually I did, and I got it mostly right. I missed out a few aspects of it, but by keeping the focus narrow, I didn't need to look at the US Air Force employing drones in Afghanistan because it was a crime novel set in Scotland. However, if you write something set 50 years in advance, that's hard. That's the point at which change is overlapping. If you look back 50 years from 2012, you're looking at 1962. The world was very, very different then. The bones of a modern world, though, were already visible. You had the space race, you had the confrontation economically between the Eastern Bloc and the West, beginning to move towards the Western Bloc winning. But you could then have predicted the capitalist robber barons coming along later. This had already happened around the 1890s, once before. Silicon chips had just about been invented. People were beginning to predict microprocessors and smaller computers. So the modern world was there in embryo in 1962. But it was very hard to predict things like, for example, the internet, or the precise shape of international relations, or whether we would get to 2012 without a nuclear war.
Interesting point of view. While we are here on SF, I want to talk a little bit about your Laundry series, or the most popular of all your series. How do you see them? Are they like your little babies or something?
I enjoy writing them, they're fun to write, but they're actually my fantasy series. I have a science fiction series marketed as fantasy, a fantasy series marketed as horror, and some of my horror is marketed as science fiction. The Laundry stuff is just fun. I always wanted to write Cold War thrillers, but the Cold War ended too early, and you know, writing a historical one doesn't do it for me, but there's nothing that's much more horrifying as an opponent than Cthulhu. So, have a spy thriller with Lovecraftian elder gods as the bad guys.
You said Lovecraft. Do you see him as your role model, maybe?
I hope not. Lovecraft himself was a very odd person, and as we say, several screws short of a full set. He did have some very interesting quirks, though. And what he gave us, early science fiction in the United States particularly, was dominated by a sense of wonder at the scale of the universe. Between 1890, when Lovecraft sort of began writing, and 1937, when he died, the universe expanded. Around 1890, it was believed to be about 2 to 10 million years old. No, timeless, but the life on Earth was only 2 to 5 million years old. The universe was static, infinite in all directions, and there was one galaxy in the middle of it, ours. By the time Lovecraft died, we knew that the universe had a beginning, but the beginning was a horrifying stretch of time ago, around 13 billion years ago, far more than the 2 million years of age they thought the Earth had. They knew that the Earth was 1,000 times older than he'd thought, but there were 100,000 million galaxies out there, not just the one they thought they knew of, and that there were more stars in our galaxy than they'd realized back then. The universe got much, much, much bigger. Most science fiction writers, they got a sense of wonder at it. Look at the scale of it. Lovecraft went in the opposite direction. He got the sense of horror, the sense of existential dread at the size and the age of a cosmos. And he's given it to us. It's the logical inverse of the sense of wonder, and it's one of the two moods that we look for when writing science fiction.
I want to ask you about publishing. You put it on the internet, your works for free. Why not all your works? And do you have plans for putting something else?
Okay, I am not Cory Doctorow. I think that should be fairly obvious. Cory doesn't have a beard. Cory has a red cape and goggles and blogs from a hot air balloon. Cory puts all his work on the internet for free. I don't. However, I have two goals. One, like most of us, is to be able to earn a living. The other is to maximize the number of readers I have. Putting some work on the internet for free is a very good promotional way of getting people who've never heard of me to read some of my work. So is writing a high-throughput blog. I have about 12 to 14,000 daily readers on my blog. Putting your work for free on the internet, however, we've gone from ebooks being a tiny minority pursuit to being almost half the English language market in just 5 years. Back at the beginning, a book that was visible on the internet or that you could read on an electronic device was a rarity. Today, everybody is self-publishing via Amazon.com for 99 cents for a book. If you just put a book on the internet for free, it will be lost in the noise. Having said that, I want to earn a living, therefore I'm trying to sell books, but I would like to maximize my readership. That is why I'm opposed to DRM, digital rights management, on ebooks. And I would like eventually to see my books available at a much lower price or free, once I've made as much money as I need for the time being to live off. So, in addition, Cory and I have written a book which will be published this September, The Rapture of the Nerds, and that will be available for free on the internet. So, Cory has this doctrinaire position, everything he writes will be free on the internet, but Cory also is a public intellectual, a public speaker. If he didn't earn any money from writing, he would still be earning a living. I'm dependent on what I write.
I understand. You mentioned DRM. Do you think that your post affected publisher Tor to remove DRM from their site?
Yes and no. The post that I put up on why Tor should remove DRM was prompted by a half-hour phone call I had from Macmillan's chief executive officer in America asking me that question. In fact, the blog post was a letter that I wrote to him in reply to his phone call. However, he didn't phone up a random blogger out of the blue to ask their opinion. There was an internal discussion going on within Tor. I know, well, within Macmillan Group, I know for a fact that Tor have wanted to do ebooks without DRM since before 2006. They were prevented from doing so by corporate level policy. They finally got an opportunity to take the argument to the boardroom and argue it directly, and I was to some extent a stalking horse for them to enlist the opinion of their writers to support the editorial viewpoint that they should go DRM free. In the final analysis, John Sargent wouldn't have issued that release that they could publish without DRM if he hadn't already been of a mind to do it. Hopefully, though, I supplied some useful arguments that helped make the deal.
Why are you so against DRM? Isn't that something that should help writers with selling of their books?
How long do we have? There's any number of reasons to be opposed to DRM. Starting with, this is not something that came from the publishers, this is something that came from a particular end of a software business who are in the business of selling snake oil, rubbish. They create fear of piracy, and then they try and sell the publishers something which they assure them will stop piracy happening. This is nonsense. The last Harry Potter book was not released as an ebook at all. It was only available on paper. Nevertheless, the ebook pirate copies appeared within 24 hours of it being published. The reason for this was that fans bought the paper book, teams of fans, and copy-typed individual chapters, then assembled them on the net. Gets better. The French edition was not due out for another 3 months. The first French edition of the last Harry Potter book was on the internet 24 hours after the first pirated English version, because again, teams of fans translated it. They crowdsourced it. So we could have infinitely effective DRM preventing any copy of commercially sold ebooks, and it would not stop piracy. What DRM does is makes a lot of money for software company managers who systematically lie by omission to media corporations about what their product will do.
You're a bit excited about that topic.
I have had to spend the last 5 or 6 years being patient and not getting angry about it in public. I feel slightly relieved now that it's semi-respectable to be able to get angry about it. I'm a reader. I've been reading ebooks for 15 years. DRM has been a persistent nuisance and a bane in my life as a reader. I think the whole piracy issue is massively overstated. Again, we know that for every book sold, there are roughly 5 readers. Back before the internet, we had a term for people who would buy a copy of a book and let all their friends read it for free. We called them librarians.
I understand. So we're coming to an end of our interview. I wish you the best for the next few days. You're staying here in Croatia.
I'm afraid I have to go home on Monday because I have work.
Okay, well, I hope you will have a nice weekend here and that you will have fun tonight on our big party in Boogaloo. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.